You're watching Unrendered on IKTV. This is Decision 2015. My guest on this edition of the program is the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves. Dr. Gonsalves, we're at our last segment and we want to talk about leadership. But I want to, as you have done, use the cricket metaphor, basically, and especially on, or centered on the leadership of Sir Frank Worrell. And I'm going to start out here by, again, using your reference to an author, Mike Marcosi, who actually describes himself as a deracinated Marxist Jew.
An American writing about cricket.
Right. But he says here in the book, Anyone But England, Cricket and the National Malaise. Cricket brought the rulers into contact with a cross-section of the ruled, but it allowed them to make this contact within a circumscribed social space, the space of the cricket field, under carefully controlled conditions embodied in the laws of cricket, like the common laws of property prevailing throughout the market economy. It allowed the rulers to participate in sport with others without jeopardizing their social standing. Whatever happened on the field, social distinctions were preserved off it. And he goes on, this dialectic of participation and separation, togetherness and divisiveness, harmony and tension in cricket, and between it and stratified societies became, in short order, infused with an ideology of the justice and permanence of a preordained or ordained, unchangeable social hierarchy in human affairs. Yes. Now, it's quite a mouthful, yes, really, but that aptly describes the cricket game as it was then and why it became...
In England, in the particular period in the 19th century,
right,
and also as was imposed by colonial Britain in the Caribbean.
Right. And
yet, this became a critical vehicle in our region for the strengthening of our Caribbean civilization.
And self-expression.
And self-expression.
And I think Hilary Bickles has
it's cricket which was brought in to the Caribbean as one of the pillars to support colonial rule. The army or the navy, the colonial administration, the governor and the like, the cricket, the church, the established church, those came, but yet cricket in time became an instrument of national liberation. And that is where it is out of that vortex that Worrell emerged.
So let's talk about Sir Frank Worrell, and let's draw the parallel with Caribbean leadership of this Caribbean civilization, because one of the things that we may have alluded to but not mentioned directly is that a civilization requires leaders in its passage.
Clearly.
And so great leadership almost demarks a great civilization.
Yes.
Sir Frank Worrell, you took a lot of time to study his leadership. I know you gave that lecture in the Sir Frank Worrell lecture series. What of Sir Frank Worrell's leadership can we borrow as leaders in this political context?
We have a short time, but let me first make a general point which forms the backdrop of what I will say about Sir Frank. Great leaders make history, but only to the extent that the circumstances of history permit them so to make.
So Mandela is a case in point.
You can't have the history being made outside
of that context.
outside of the real world which takes place, which with all the contradictions. And the leader himself comes to the table with many things in his head from the past, and he has to appreciate the new moments for his own self-emancipation to carry the process forward. Toussaint Louverture in the Haitian Revolution did it. And several great leaders. I mean, in fact, that's a hallmark of the great leaders. They make history. They make history, but only to the extent that the circumstances of history permit them so to make. Worrell was well schooled. He had a number of skills. He had a particular socialization in Barbados, which instilled in him certain values. Played cricket very well, went to Combermere School. Incidentally, to show the extent of the discipline, when Worrell as a youngster made the West Indies team, well, the Barbados team first, when he was a schoolboy, the morning when he used to play cricket, he had to turn up to school and get permission from the headmaster to go down to Kensington Oval to play cricket for Barbados. I'm giving a snapshot of the backdrop. He developed his skill, he had expertise, he's well respected by his peers. He becomes the first black man to captain West Indies outside of the West Indies. George Headley had done so in one test in the West Indies. And the colonial structures are such. Persons who metaphorically couldn't tie Worrell's shoelaces, white people,
chosen ahead of him.
were chosen ahead of him to be captain. So he goes now to Australia in 1960 for the 60-61 series. He's given a team. Now remember 60-61. It's a period of increasing nationalism throughout the world and a sense of national liberation. So this is all part and parcel of that context. He's given a team where several persons were not known to each other.
Disparate, as you call
Disparate men. Not desperate men.
I know, disparate.
Disparate. D-I-S-P-A-R-A-T-E. To play against the most powerful team at the time, Australia, in Australia. And CLR James, in Beyond the Boundary, describes Worrell's leadership for something which we as leaders must take cognizance. Worrell did not so much instill in his men as draw out of them. Each of them came with strengths, possibilities. Of course, they had weaknesses. They hadn't yet emerged as grand figures on the stage.
Right.
But Worrell drew out of them, not to instill.
Right.
He drew out of them, he took out of them through his leadership that was good in them, the excellence in them, that was noble in them. And he drew out of them that which often, or certainly sometimes, that they did not know as yet that they possessed.
That they had.
Now that is an extraordinary hallmark of a leader. To have men and, well, in this case men, but in my own case, and anybody who aspires to leadership, men and women, to assess their strengths and weaknesses, get to know them, have confidence in them, and to draw out of them their goodness, their nobility, to draw out of them their possibilities. Often, sometimes, which they themselves did not know as yet that they possess, so that they will perform above what they would have thought was their natural level of the game.
In the book, you referred to...
and that to me is the crux of the answer to the question which you pose.
And to sort of support what you're saying. In the book, I cannot remember if it was C.L.R. James that spoke of a particular approach that Worrell had, where if somebody was doing something wrong on the field, he'll simply go and tell them what they were doing wrong.
Yes.
But left it up to them to fix that wrong. See, he was not prescriptive.
No, and this is where I'm talking about drawing out of people. His quality, his leadership, the men respected him. And he had all the competencies and all that. But you're saying, guys, you did this wrong. You know what you have to do to put it right.
To put it right. But clearly,
it's an extraordinarily mature form of leadership.
Clearly, he must have had the ultimate respect, absolute respect, of the same group of disparate men that you're talking about. What is the quality that allowed him to command that sort of respect?
His own evolution and his accomplishments. That they knew that they were being led by a man of accomplishment and a man of extraordinary vision and a man who was deeply interested in the enterprise in which he was involved, in the people of the region, they themselves, their own welfare.
So here's how I read it, because I'm going to come back now, and we're going to use the metaphor in its fullest sense. We're going to come back now to Caribbean leaders, and we're talking about Caribbean civilization. We're talking about the whole oneness, integration. And I hear you as saying, and I read you as saying, that Worrell had a narrative for West Indies cricket.
Oh, he had a compelling narrative, not just a narrative, a compelling narrative. He assessed properly the extant condition. And he knew where he wanted to go. And he had confidence in the persons who were on his team and to draw out of them what is good and noble in them, what sometimes they did not. Goodness and nobility they did not know that they possessed. And he didn't worry about people who were trying to sidetrack him and be detractors. He kept his focus because he knew where he wanted to go. He had that belief in himself, and he has a certainty about himself as a Caribbean personality.
The thing about that, Dr. Gonsalves, and people looking at this program may say that you are quietly saying that, hey, I am a prodigy of Sir Frank Worrell, if you know what I mean. You are now a leader, and you may be suggesting that you are of Worrell-like type character, okay? And then there are those who would say that Worrell, in all of that, had humility, okay? Caribbean leaders, including yourself, who are engaged in this competitive politics, sometimes, more often than not, come across as being arrogant, as if that is part of the whole nature of the competition itself, you know, and even the political pecan.
But you know, I'll tell you this. Worrell's critics and those who said they weren't going to give him leadership, when they wanted to cover up all their old prejudices based on race and class and the plantation economy, said that he was too much of a rebel. He did not go on the tour to India in 1948 because the West Indies Cricket Board of Control at the time didn't want to come to terms with some very reasonable things that he wanted.
And I know it was called Board of Control.
Yes, and he was dubbed a rebel. That's 1948. At the same time, he had tremendous respect, and he led a Commonwealth team subsequently, the years subsequently, to India. He went to the University of Manchester. He wanted to improve himself. They thought that he was an uppity fella. You know, he comes from a background, what is he? Cricketers want to be professionals. He's studying the social sciences. You know, what? People from where they come from, you think you can...
Hanging his hat where his hand can't reach.
So they thought he himself was quite arrogant.
Was arrogant, yes.
And he left Barbados and went to live in Jamaica because he could not abide the constraints of Barbados with its plantation society and the starched nature of its conservatism as he perceived it. So there were all kinds of critics about him. A C.L.R. James, a revolutionary, writing out of Trinidad for The Nation, which was the Eric Williams's People's National Movement newspaper,
yes,
which led the campaign regionally for Worrell to be the captain.
Yes.
So that, now, as a leader, you have to have confidence in yourself. As a leader, you must have some sets of accomplishment. You have to come to the table with something, but you have to have a compelling narrative. You have to have an insight into men and women and how to hold them together and what to draw out of them to be able to articulate this, to walk the talk, as they say nowadays in a cliched form. Now we do all those things, people will say that you're arrogant. Am I supposed to be said that I'm full of myself because I just wrote 2 books upon those which I've written before? No, I would have thought that where it would have been a travesty is for Almighty God to have given unto me certain blessings.
And you don't use them.
That I don't use them. I have to give an account of what He has given to me. So it
yes,
is what perspective you're looking at and from. But at the same time, you must be true to yourself. And you walk humbly with your fellow men and very importantly with God.
We're just about at the end of this program, and it's been extended. And we are looking at, in as much as we're looking at Sir Frank Worrell and his leadership, and in as much as we're talking about the theme or the topic of your book, or Caribbean Civilization and its political prospects, it begs the question, you are of a particular generation, and I know you'd probably tell me generations provide leaders for the time, but do you have a sense, Dr. Gonsalves, that there is sufficient passion and will and commitment with the leaders that are coming up to forge this Caribbean integration to that point that it needs to get to?
Well, I would think yes. And in our party, the Unity Labour Party, I'm trying to make sure that I have a number of young men and women who share this kind of perspective, and I encourage them to read and study and to develop this, not just with passion but with commitment. Because, you know, there's an Irish poet, W.B. Yeats, in a poem called The Second Coming, written in just at the time of the First World War, says something like this, that the best of all lack conviction, and the worst are full of passionate intensity. You have to have passion, but more than the passion, you have to have a commitment. And insofar as the options you're talking about, towards the end of this section in the book, I said 2 options face our Caribbean civilization. The beaten path, the well-beaten path of the post-independence period, which is likely to lead to an absorption by the metropolitan centers, loss of independence, cultural domination, continued underdevelopment, and in all probability, increase in misery for our people. And the creative alternative of the Caribbean as an independent, authentic civilization, which blossoms and bears fruits abundantly within a political union of the region. I said, if the first option is pursued, that is one of continued dependence in the way in which we have been doing. I'm not talking about fraternal solidarity. I'm talking about dependence in perspective on how you do things. If the first option is pursued, I predict that within 50 years, the Caribbean would be working out an associate status with the United States or Europe. Now, there would be an independence in name. Now, those who want that option can have it. And sometimes, you know, leaders, very often leaders have to take bold steps. Because incrementalist work is very important. Keep things going, ticking over. But if that's all you do, you're not involved in leadership, you're involved in the management of things. Right. And a leader has to recognize that where you have to go, there is a chasm, a gorge. And you can't cross a chasm in baby steps. If you seek to cross a chasm in incrementalist steps, you will go into the depth of the gorge.
So you have to leap.
You have to leap. In relation to the Argyle International Airport,
you're saying that's
we leapt.
That's a giant step.
We leapt. I couldn't take it in baby steps. And from the time it was conceptualized to now, you have a lot of backward people just don't understand how this is an exemplar, a metaphor indeed, for what we have to do to further ennoble our Caribbean civilization.
Dr. Gonsalves, it's been a pleasure. We've extended our time, but it's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
Unrendered. And I have dubbed my programs this year Decision 2015. And I know you're the person who's going to decide when that decision is going to be made.
Yes.
And I will have you back.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming. This has been another edition of Unrendered. My guest was the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves. Do join us the next time Unrendered airs.